Welcome back into the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast. This is section 3, the last section here with our guest, Mid-Major Matt, on Twitter at Mid-Major Matt. Mid-Major Matt, welcome to the pod. How are you?
Good. A roller coaster of emotions. The MAC released their schedule today, so I'm really excited about that. There's Tuesday and Wednesday action coming up in November. But, of course, we are also sad that Houston Baptist's season is done. And they closed it out with a flourish and a victory last week like we predicted.
And Mid-Major Matt, is the MAC going to be eligible for the postseason with the SEC and ACC in a bunch, or is this going to be kind of a separate postseason?
I think they'll be eligible. I mean, they're only playing 6 games, so they're not going to be making any national playoffs or anything like that. But just to have some Tuesday and Wednesday night college football is always a good thing.
Oh, no argument here, man. I'll watch it and bet it anytime. Tuesday, Wednesday night action is available. And in that same realm here, guys, it's a lot of the non-power 5 in section 3 here. Starting off, 339, 340, the rotation numbers. And on this podcast, we will go down the rest of the college football card here. If you're following along at home, 3:30 Eastern kick in this Sunbelt affair on ESPN2. 62 being the total. Troy, that's the Troy Trojans, laying 7 in the hook at home.
So before we go any further here, with a couple of these games, you're going to have to pay attention to Hurricane Delta because it's in the path of a lot of places and there will be rain and wind. So some of these games I'll give opinions and leans, but we won't know until Saturday what the weather's going to be like. And this is one of those games right here because Troy is in the path of the hurricane. We don't know how far it's going to be. What's the wind going to be? What's the rain? Assume there's going to be rain for a game like this. Texas State, 2 weeks ago, they played pretty well. I was kicking myself because I really liked the game, and I decided on the over because I told myself, I was like, look, if Texas State's going to keep it close, which I thought they were going to have to do it in a higher scoring game. Well, BC didn't really do their part. It was a 24-21 game, but Texas State accounted for themselves well. Look, this year, they've played pretty well. They have the 38-17 road win at Louisiana Monroe, and they lost that game by 7 to SMU, and they lost that game close to UTSA. The biggest problem that Texas State has had is in terms of their quarterbacks. They've basically played quarterback roulette in terms of their COVID situation. Brady McBride played last week. Tyler Vitt was held back because of contact tracing. Tyler Vitt played earlier this season because Brady McBride was contact tracing. So it'll be interesting to see. Both of them were back in practice, so that will help, although I'm happier with regards to Brady McBride. Texas State's defense is not terrible. They're not great, though. Troy has played just 2 games. Their last game was that terrible loss at BYU. They came down to earth big time, 48-7. It almost should have been higher, but BYU showed mercy, kneeling the ball. I think it was on like the 5-yard line. They beat MTSU 47-14 on September 19th. Last week's game against South Alabama was postponed, so Troy's kind of had a bit of a disjointed start to their season. To me, I kind of lean to Texas State, but the problem here is with regards to both of these offenses, if there's rain and wind, you're going to have to lean to the better run game. The better run game is with Troy. I think that Troy's group of backs is a lot better than Texas State's. If there is a lot of rain and wind and we do see a lot of running in this game, the under could be worth a look here because you'll see a lot of clock. It'll almost be like a pair of triple option teams going at each other in terms of both of them are going to run it a lot. So I'm going to be wishy-washy here. We need to, once we get closer to Saturday, we need to see how this weather forecast goes and how that will factor in because Texas State's passing game could keep up with Troy's passing game, but if it's really windy, neither team is going to throw the ball a ton.
Next game up here at Mid-Major Matt, ULM at Liberty. We're talking Louisiana Monroe here. 61 the total. Looks like -19, -19.5. Liberty at home.
I really liked what I saw from Louisiana Monroe last week. They lose 35-30 at Georgia Southern. Colby Suits had his best game of the season, 31-54, 334 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. That's been the concern when it comes to Louisiana Monroe. Look, they're not getting much from their run game, but the pass game was a major issue, and they kind of figured some things out. They're throwing for 265 yards per game. If you look a little bit, Liberty has had some issues against the pass. Now, granted, they haven't played as much, and last week they played North Alabama, so you're not going to take much out of that game. They won that game 28-7. The big thing was Chris Ferguson was the quarterback, the main transfer. Malik Willis sat out because they didn't really need Malik Willis. He's going to be back, and that's going to change things with regards to Liberty's offense because his mobility has been big, and Hugh Freeze is going to use it, and you know how fast Hugh Freeze wants to run this offense, but he wants to run it fast with the starter. The Flames' defense has actually been pretty good. 21 tackles for loss, 12 sacks through 3 games. They're 8th in the country with 4 sacks per game. Pretty good. You don't expect that from Liberty, and they lost a lot of pieces on their defense. They also have a road game against Syracuse next week. Now, I don't know necessarily if Liberty's in the position to overlook anybody, but if they do, Louisiana Monroe can certainly make things interesting. Small lean to the over here. I think Liberty can get whatever they want offensively. I think Louisiana Monroe, especially if Colby Suits shows up, the one that was last week, I think they could put some points up here as well. Liberty wants to run at a breakneck speed. I think the over might be worth a look here.
And we got M. Rob watching live on the WagerTalk YouTube channel saying, give me Liberty. Also, welcome in Johnny Outlaw and Jamal Madison. Welcome in, guys. This is the Sports Memo Podcast, wherever you're downloading your podcasts at. Remember, Sports Memo Podcast and simulcast on the WagerTalk YouTube channel. If you're watching live, feel free to chime in the chat box. And if you're watching on replay, feel free to write any comments below, and please smash the like button if you're liking the Every Game on the Board podcast. We got 343-344 up next, Matt. UTSA at BYU. We're seeing BYU, Matt. They're a darling in the betting markets now. Minus 35 points at home, 63 being the total here.
I really do hate these name your score type of games. I mean, BYU's thousands of times better. Last week we had the over for BYU's team total points. They put up 45. It was a winner. They beat Louisiana Tech 45-14. I think we're going to potentially look at the over for the BYU team total points here once again. The statistics they're putting up, Zach Wilson has just 11 incompletions all year. His completion percentage is 84.5%. That's unreal. They've had eight. I mean, it's ridiculous. They barely ran the ball successfully. Lapini Katawa, was one of their big time backs. He didn't really do much last week because Algair was the better one out of the backfield. This team's only had 8 penalties all season. Look, if you look at the competition, they really haven't played anybody. So it's hard. The Detroit team's really good, but they're not ready for BYU. Louisiana Tech has a decent offense. They weren't really ready for BYU. Navy certainly wasn't. They didn't tackle before the game, and that's why BYU put up all those great points. Once again, UTSA is a decent team. They lost 21-13 at UAB. We talked about it last week because it was in my slate about the quarterbacks. Frank Harris is back, took most of the first team reps in practice. Backup quarterback Josh Adkins is out 4 to 6 weeks. So it's important that Frank Harris stays healthy. The Roadrunners can move the ball. They average 209 yards per game on the ground, and Harris has some mobility here. But, I mean, BYU's not going to be fooled. To me, this is a BYU team total over here. I think that BYU can name their score, and you just hope they score a lot of those points early. The backups come in and add to that. But to me, this is a mismatch. I'm not going to get involved with the side here because BYU should be able to win this game 55-0 if they want to. The problem is there's been a couple of times where they've knelt the ball down, at one point. So to me, I'm just going to go and take the BYU over on their team total points.
All right, Matt, we got FAU at Southern Miss up next in a Conference USA affair, 345-346. The rotation numbers 4 Eastern, 1 o'clock Pacific kick on Stadium Network. -2 in the hook. That's FAU on the road, 57 being the total. I kind of like Southern Miss here, Matt. What do you think?
So this is another game with the weather involved, the hurricane. So that's something we're going to have to watch out for. FAU won this game at home 34-17 last year. I mean, I could just tell you one stat that told you why. Jack Abraham threw 4 interceptions. And that's the problem with Jack Abraham his whole career is that at times the turnovers have just been an issue. Florida Atlantic won their first game last week, 21-17 over Charlotte. Nick Tronti, the Indiana transfer, had 98 passing yards, 94 rushing yards. There was the typical kinks that there would be in the first game. It's going to be interesting to see BJ Emmons, their starting running back, and backup James Charles both left the game with injuries. They're not going to have starting safety Jordan Helm for this game. So, am I ready to back an FAU team on the road yet? No, I don't think so. You look on the Southern Miss side, they beat North Texas 41-31 on the road. They only had 53 players available. So this is another game with the COVID situation here. Southern Miss has dealt with COVID all season long, it feels like, and they only had 53 players available. So before you could jump in on either side in this game, you really have to figure out who's going to play. And unfortunately, we're not going to find out till game of when they tweet out who's not available. So to me, this is a hard game to play, and then you throw in the hurricane forecast and everything. So to me, this is an easy skip for now until we find out more information. Also, wide receiver Tim Jones has been out the last 2 weeks due to a hamstring issue. He's questionable for the game. So to me, there's a lot of question marks here. I can't put anything in right now. We'll maybe revisit this thing closer to Saturday when we know more about the weather, who's available for Southern Miss, and, if BJ Emmons is going to play for Florida Atlantic.
Matt, a couple questions, like handicapping questions for you. When you say tweet out who's playing for COVID, for any handicappers out there looking to kind of get better at their craft, would you just recommend following the beat writers for all of these college football teams, especially the non-power five ones? And that's the best way to kind of go at who's going to be suited up, ready to go?
Yeah, I would say that. Plus, some of the official team accounts are better at doing that stuff than others. Like the last couple of weeks, Virginia Tech has tweeted out their non-participation list, but it's basically been saying 24 players and 2 coaches or 30, whatever it is. So I would follow the beat reporter that, you do a Google search, look up like Southern Miss football, find the guy who covers them the most, and then follow him on Twitter. These are guys who are probably going to watch who comes out from the field and things like that. Some teams are better at that than others, but look, Southern Miss is under no obligation to tell us until even after kickoff, who's going to be available. So, it's a lot of things to consider here. So maybe it's best to pass because, as I said, I haven't actually said this in a couple of weeks. Vegas is to put out lines for everything. We don't have to bet everything.
Yeah, because that's one thing that I found, at least the NFL is a little bit better at, is the COVID issue with college football. Sometimes you don't know until kickoff. It's kind of a gamble, at least with some of these teams, Matt, because it's kind of a competitive advantage for them not to tell you, to not let the other team know.
Well, it's funny because I follow the Virginia Tech people, and there's a guy, Andy Bitter, who basically says, all right, let's see who comes out of the tunnel, and that'll kind of help us. Like, here's the Group A, here's the Group B, here's who's not dressed. So, I mean, it makes things tough, but it's certainly something to consider because there have been some teams and some programs that we'll talk about that have had COVID issues, and they don't go away. I mean, a lot of these schools are not properly equipped to handle it. And there's the things where, somebody will test positive, and then, 2 weeks later, somebody else will test positive. So to me, best to stay away from this game. If you really want to get involved, make sure to check the weather and make sure to check the beat reporters to see who's available.
And one where involving a team that took it very, very seriously, took the safe route, not even tackling before the first game, and it cost them. Navy at home hosting Temple. We're seeing the Temple Owls -3 in the hook on the highway, 50 the total in this one, Matt.
God, there are so many angles to this game, so I'll be quick. Temple's won 4 of their last 5 in this series. Temple's had, they've been very good when it comes to preparing for the triple option, but they've had a weird offseason. Philadelphia hadn't allowed them, since they're in the Philadelphia proper, they were not allowed to have practices for the longest time. And then even when they did have practices, they had small group practices. They got the clearance, it was like 2-3 weeks ago, to have normal practices. Now, look, they've had plenty of time to prepare for the triple option here. So far this season, teams who have played their first game against teams who are not playing their first game are 3-3. Air Force won last week against the same Navy team. UVA won, 2 weeks ago against Duke. And Cincinnati won. Technically, that game was against Austin Peay because Austin Peay had that game beforehand. And the 3 losers were all FCS teams. So therefore, you throw that part of the equation out. So when you look at Temple, this is their first game of the season. It is October. It will be October 10th. It'll be their first game of the season, which is pretty crazy. Their offense is pretty experienced. They've got some good skill position guys. They've got their quarterback back. There's some interesting transfers. Real Mitchell, for those who are familiar with Iowa State, he's the backup quarterback. I'm guessing he'll be involved in some packages. The left tackle, though, was in quarantine the last couple of weeks. He's jumping from quarantine over to left tackle. Problem is Navy's defense hasn't been very good. Navy has been pushed around quite a bit this season. Ken Niumatalolo basically said, quote, we've gotten out physical this year, and Temple over the years is the most physical team we've played in our league. So basically it's a concern here. Now, Dallin Morris will be under center for Navy. He missed the last game with a medical ailment. It wasn't COVID, but he was out because of medical. They lost that game to Air Force 40-7. Navy's offense just hasn't worked this year. They're averaging fewer than 247 yards per game. Temple's defensive coordinator has never gone up against a triple option, so that's a concern. You always want to see some experience when it comes to that sort of thing, and their defense only has 4 starters back. It's interesting that Temple's favored here. On a normal week in the middle of the season, I'd like Temple here. The question is, can we trust Navy? And I don't know if we can, because if you look at the 6 halves they've played this year, they've been terrible in 5 of them. The second half of the Tulane game was the only time we saw a pulse from this team. So the under might be worth a look here, especially a first half under. If you think that Temple's going to struggle out of the gate, and if you think that Navy's going to have potentially some clock grinding drives and Temple has some early success against the triple option, the first half under could be the way to go here, especially when you've got an Owls team getting their legs under them.
All right, we got Conference USA action here. Middle Tennessee at FIU. Florida International laying 3.5 or 4. 56.5 the total in Miami, Matt.
MTSU has been terrible this season. They lose 20-17 at Western Kentucky last week. Non-Asher O'Hara rushers had 8 carries for 4 yards. He basically, here's the statistic for you. He had 188 yards at one point in the second half, and the team as a whole had 187. So he actually had more yards than the whole team. He finished with 315 total yards. The rest of the team had 319. He even punted once. So Asher O'Hara means a lot to Middle Tennessee. It's a team I can't back right now. The problem is I can't back FIU either. They lost last week 36-34 at Liberty. They played 3 different quarterbacks. The best quarterback could have been a freshman, Stone Norton. They allowed 527 total yards. They had 31 first downs in the game. They had 15 penalties for 127 total yards. Now, look, it was their first game of the season, so of course there was going to be some sloppiness. Based on everything alone situationally, you lean to Middle Tennessee because they've played. They've had a bunch of middle weeks in a row where they've played. But they've been terrible. So why isn't this line bigger? Florida International at least showed a pulse last week against Liberty, and they're the home team in this one. It smells a little bit fishy here. I lean to Florida International here, but I also wonder why it's not a bigger line considering Middle Tennessee has been so bad this season.
I'm with you, Matt. This is a surprising one. I like FIU here, but you're right. It might smell a little fishy, especially because of it opened 6. Now it's down to 4. Yeah, I don't really agree with that line move at all. But we got another one here. UTEP at Louisiana Tech, Matt. Looks like the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs, -14 in the hook at home, 51.5 the total. And I believe it's Ruston, Louisiana.
That is correct. It is Ruston. If there's not a better picture of 2020 embodied in college football, it's UTEP being 3-1 so far this season. UTEP, who's had like one win the past couple of years, has 3-1. Now, look, they beat Louisiana Monroe last week 31-6. Their wins before that were over FCS schools, Stephen F. Austin and Abilene Christian. The one game against anybody that with a pulse, they lose 59-3 to Texas. UTEP's got great numbers. Defensively, they're only allowing 355 yards per game. The rush defense is 102.8 points per game, and they're allowing only 23 points per game. But once again, it is a schedule where they've basically feasted on cupcakes. Louisiana Tech lost last Friday night, 45-14 at BYU, and everybody's really throwing on them. The problem is I don't know if I could trust the UTEP in order to throw the ball. They did go into the Louisiana Monroe game talking about getting Gavin Hardison, the quarterback, more involved in terms of passing the ball, and then there were some mixed results here. Gavin Hardison is a competent quarterback. He's actually a good quarterback considering what UTEP has basically put out there the past couple of years. I would look at the UTEP team total under here, but Louisiana Tech's defense hasn't been that good. I'd actually consider the under here. UTEP is one of the few teams who actually huddles for the most part. And even when they don't huddle, they kind of have that muddle huddle where they're like standing in their formation, they're looking over. They don't want to get into one of these games where they're back and forth. UTEP, the best thing they can do is just kind of go at their own pace and run their offense. And while I'm concerned that their passing game may not necessarily take advantage of Louisiana Tech's passing game, UTEP's got to have some confidence right now. So to me, I'm looking at the under here. It's not one of my favorite plays. It's definitely just a lean here, but I think UTEP in the under here, UTEP under is the way to go in this game. The only thing is Louisiana Tech could be really frustrated after the loss to BYU. They're a better team than they played. Louisiana Tech could win this game rather easily, but I'll take a chance that it's like a 37-14 type game and it goes under the total.
This is the Sports Memo podcast. Every game on the board. We're doing college football right now. This is the last section. The first 2 sections you can find under the Sports Memo podcast as well. We also do the NFL Every Game on the Board podcast, Sports Memo podcast, also simulcast on the WagerTalk YouTube channel. Mid-major Matt talking right now. He's 18-11 in his last 29 college football plays. Check out his action. SportsMemo.com's got a free play in MLB right now. He's also 21-12 in his last 33 NFL props. So you're doing a lot of props here, mid-major Matt, in the NFL, huh?
Doing a lot of props in there in college football and baseball. So, look, as we talk about, you don't necessarily have to bet the side and the total. There's not as many college football props, but we do occasionally throw in some team totals when it comes to college football. But yeah, I like to think that I'm carving out a little bit of a niche when it comes to props in sports.
All right, so check him out on Twitter as well, at Mid-Major Matt. We got 3 more FBS games here, and then we'll throw it over to you for the FCS VIP section, which isn't an additional cost. It's all free here on the Every Game on the Board podcast. We got Florida State at Notre Dame up next. Top 5 ranked Notre Dame, by the way, Mid-Major Matt. -20 in the hook or -21 at home, 52 the total here, Matt.
I appreciate you throwing in the mid-major Florida State Seminoles into this podcast. Ooh, sorry that for the Seminoles, although they know they're not very good. Florida State's got to be feeling good. 41-24, they beat Jacksonville State last week, and they found their starting quarterback. Jordan Travis went 13-20, 222 passing yards. He had a passing touchdown. He did throw an interception in the season. Look, Florida State in terms of they have a good defense, but the problem is when their offense keeps going 3 and out, they're gonna get tired. It's something we've seen from a lot of the same teams where the offense is not helping out the defense. They were without 2 injured starters last Saturday: defensive tackle Robert Cooper and safety Travis Jay. Defensive lineman Marvin Wilson was out the first half last week. He had a targeting call. They're going to get a little healthier here. I think some of those guys are going to be back. Notre Dame is going to have some health benefits themselves. Kevin Austin Jr., the wide receiver, is going to have his season debut. The grad transfer Ben Skralnick is going to be playing from a hamstring injury, and Braden Lindsey's 100% healthy. So they're going to have the wide receivers, and that's important. First 2 games of the season, Notre Dame's wide receiving group had only just 11 of the team's 32 pass receptions. Thing is, Notre Dame's had a lot of time off. Their last game was September 19th against South Florida. They won 52-0. Notre Dame's had a lot of COVID issues themselves. Surprising for a big university like that, they have not handled COVID very well. As of Monday, they had 7 players in isolation from positive test results, 4 players in quarantine from contact tracing. Now, that number was 25 and 14 a week ago, so things are improving, but it's a challenge here. So I think you kind of know where I'm going here. I can't take Florida State. I can't take Notre Dame. I think this is a first half under. This is essentially a couple weeks off for Notre Dame. You're going to have a rusty Fighting Irish team and a Florida State offense I don't trust going up against a Notre Dame defense that is very good. And they've played very well this season, although the opponents haven't been great. I think that this is a first half under here. I'm going to play a little rust factor on Notre Dame as they get all these new weapons involved, and I'm going to hope that you get a rested Florida State defense against them. And I certainly don't trust this Florida State offense. So first half under here is where I'm probably looking at Florida State and Notre Dame.
All right, Matt, next game up here, back in the comfort zone, Charlotte at North Texas. We're seeing the 49ers of Charlotte, by the way, -3 on the road, 67.5 the total in Denton, Texas.
Charlotte lost 21-17 at Florida Atlantic last week. They've only played 2 games. This is another team that has gone through amazing with regards to COVID, luck or unluck, however you want to paint it, because they had the North Carolina game. That game got canceled, and then they've had some other games. And so they played last week, but it's only the second game of the season. Because of it's only the second game of the season, this team is towards the top in a lot of statistics: red zone defense, passing yards allowed, penalties, 4th down conversion. So I don't know what to make of Charlotte yet. I do like Reynolds at quarterback. I like Victor Tucker at wide receiver. I think that this is a team that has potential. Of course, Reynolds may not necessarily be 100%. He got injured way back in game 1. That was about a month and a half ago. North Texas lost last week 41-31, but they officially named their starting quarterback, Austin Oon, who I think is 27 years old, which I think is crazy. He's on the Drew Henson plan, right? Wasn't Drew Henson like 30 and still playing college? No, excuse me. Chris Wenke.
Yeah.
Chris Wenke, excuse me. I should smack
Drew Henson was older as well.
But yes, he's on the Chris Wenke plan. Oon looked good against last week against Southern Miss. Even in the loss, 339 yards and 2 touchdowns. Here's the problem with North Texas. They're going to be without Jair Shorter, who has been amazing at wide receiver. They're going to be without Oscar Adaway, the third at running back. He leads them with 222 rushing yards and has 2 rushing touchdowns. So that's a lot of North Texas's offense right there. Senior linebacker Tyreek Davis is returning to the Mean Greens lineup. Neither of these 2 teams play great defense. But, man, this total is just so high. And I don't know if I could trust North Texas to score a ton. So, to me, I'm going to wait and see what the North Texas team total is. I might lean to the under there. This total is really high. We might actually get value. So something I like to do occasionally is play both team totals under, especially if the total is different than the 2-point totals combined, because you're going to get a lot of line movement when it comes to the total itself, but you will not get as much movement on the team totals themselves. So you might find some value if you play both teams unders, especially if it's, let's say it was a game total of 70, and it falls down to 67, well, there's a chance that the team totals, because they haven't been bet as much, are still 70. So you see what I'm saying, Drew? I don't know if I'm explaining this well. Sometimes there is value on the unders for the team totals as opposed to the game under, because there's not as much action on the team totals themselves.
I'm picking up what you're laying down, and we got one more game here, mid-major Matt, at the FBS level. Marshall at Western Kentucky. Talk about good offenses, man. Western Kentucky, not one of them, as this total is down to 44.5. And Western Kentucky at home, -6.5 here. That's the Marshall Thundering Herd laying on the road. Is this going to be affected by the hurricane, to your knowledge, Matt?
As far as we know, it's going to be in the path. And so that's something you're definitely going to want to consider, especially when you look at the total in this game. Marshall hasn't played for 3 weeks. Their last game was a 17-7 win over App State. So this is another team that's been kind of rusty. And don't forget, they've got the freshman quarterback in Grant Wells. So you're asking a freshman quarterback here to basically go and play. The first game was a win, easy win over Eastern Kentucky, and then they beat App State on the road. Very impressive. But now you're asking him basically the last 3 weeks to kind of just chill a little bit. Their last couple of weeks, they've done a lot of competitions, a lot of the one-on-ones, but they've had some COVID issues too. So that's something to look at. Western Kentucky is a team that's getting better defensively. They beat Middle Tennessee 2017 on the road last week. Tyrell Pegram, the Maryland transfer, has completed 21 of 36 attempts for 188 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's got some solid mobility as well. I really kind of lean, and I don't know if there's sevens out there. I kind of lean to the home team here. Western Kentucky's defense did not play well the first couple of weeks. They're starting to get better. I think there's some value here, especially if you maybe want to play the first half Western Kentucky team, because Marshall's been off for 3 weeks and they have a freshman quarterback, and you're basically saying to him, all right, play some games and then take some time off and play some games again. And I like Western Kentucky's defense here, so I would consider Western Kentucky plus the points. And then I'd even consider a small sprinkle on Western Kentucky first half, because you might get a rusty Marshall team that maybe needs a half to get used to everything. So Western Kentucky plus the points, Western Kentucky first half are the 2 ways I would lean. But once again, also the weather situation, we got to wait till Saturday to see what the weather's going to be like in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Check mid-major Matt out, sportsmemo.com. 18-11 his last 29 college football plays. Also doing prop plays, 21-12, 64% in his last 33 NFL props. He puts that out, sportsmemo.com. Free play available as well. Mid-major Matt, we're up against it time-wise, so I'll throw it over to you FCS style. Anything you want to throw out on the FCS games before we shut this down?
All right, so there are only 2, which is really sad. Central Arkansas is at Arkansas State. Arkansas State about a 2-touchdown favorite. The total is 66. Once again, weather could become an issue a little bit here. Central Arkansas is coming off their Super Bowl last week. They played North Dakota State in North Dakota State's only game of the season. They lost the game 39-28. It's been an offense that's been pretty good so far for Central Arkansas. So I wonder if there's going to be a bit of a letdown after losing that game, especially the way they did. They had a fourth quarter lead, and North Dakota State came back and got the victory. Arkansas State has to be pissed off. They lose 52-23 at Coastal Carolina last week. Arkansas State has scored at least 23 in all 3 of their games. They've given up at least 31 in all 3 of their games. Lean to the over here in this one. The problem will be when it's more widely available, the total will already get juiced up. And plus, we don't know about the weather, so we'll have to look. Follow me on Twitter at MidMajorMatt. We'll talk about it on Saturday, depending upon the weather. There's 2 games left. Citadel at the Army. Army about a 30.5, 29-point favorite in this one. Total falling to 47. The reason why the total is falling in this one is it's 2 triple option teams. Citadel doesn't get often an option to play their rivals like this. The Citadel, Army, Navy, Air Force, VMI, these are all the military academies. They don't often get the opportunity to play against Army. They're going to be really excited for this game. Problem is the Citadel's not very good. They lost to Eastern Kentucky 37-14 2 weeks ago. They lost 49-0 to Clemson. They lost 27-6 to South Florida. Army's coming off the 55-23 win over Abilene Christian last week. They do not have a look ahead. Last year, they beat VMI 47-6. It's a big number, probably for a reason. Both of these teams are going to run the triple option. If Army runs the triple option as well as they did last week, the total may go over that total. You may want to wait, let it keep falling a little bit, find some value on the over there. And then the last game is Mercer and Jacksonville State. This is a true FCS game. First game of the season for Mercer. They're only playing 3 contests this year. They're playing at Army on October 24th. They're hosting Abilene Christian on October 31st. Mercer's got 7 starters back on offense, 5 starters back on defense, so there could be some rustiness early on from Mercer as they work up to this game. Jacksonville State lost that game 41-24 to Florida State last week. Zarek Cooper, the Clemson transfer, 22 of 30, 232 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception. Maybe an early look here on Jacksonville State first half. I don't know if they're even going to offer it because it's a true first half of an FCS game. But if there is, I like playing the non-rusty team against the rusty team in the first half. So look at Jacksonville State in the first half of that one.
He's Mid-Major Matt, mainstay here on the Every Game on the Board podcast. Follow him on Twitter at Mid-Major Matt and his work, sportsmemo.com. Matt, best of luck with your bets. Everyone out there, best of luck with your bets as well. We'll be right back with Minty Bets if you're watching on the YouTube channel with the NFL Every Game on the Board podcast. And then at 4 o'clock Pacific, we'll bring in Jeff to finish off the middle section of the college football Every Game on the Board podcast. So for Mid-Major Matt, I am Drew Martin. Best of luck with your bets, guys.